Here we are on the path of yoga and meditation and spiritual discipline, and so we know that to be saintly, you're supposed to be beyond emotions. And so we tell ourselves, well, I'm not supposed to feel anger, therefore I don't feel anger. Well, if you feel anger, you feel anger, and you're not going to get rid of it by saying you don't. All you're going to do is push it down into your subconscious where it'll fester, and it'll come out in some other way, usually much worse because you don't even know where it came from. I know one person who lived this way too long and began taking a sledgehammer to the walls of his home. Just went completely berserk. You can't push those things down. You can't get rid of them by pretending that they aren't there. Face them. Accept them. Release them. It's that simple. You can't take the energy away from a particular level and, well, all right, here's an example. Years ago, I was driving across San Francisco to give a class. And suddenly, you know how suddenly a cold can seize you sometimes? Suddenly I felt this cold seize me, and I began to just feel sick all over. It was just in a second it happened. And I said to myself, I don't have time to get sick now. I've got classes to give. I'm trying to earn the money to pay off pay off Ananda's building debts and so on. And so I said, get out! Like that. And it said, oh, yes, sir, yes, sir. By the time I took the next breath, it was gone. It wouldn't have gone if I hadn't recognized it in the first place. You know, there's a story about a Baptist, a Catholic, and a Christian Scientist that all died and went to the wrong place. And they were trying to figure out how they got there. And the Catholic said, well, maybe I missed Mass one Sunday. And the Baptist said, well, perhaps I wasn't fully immersed when I was baptized. And so they turned to the Christian Scientist and said, well, why are you here? And the Christian Scientist said, oh, but I'm not. Well, if you are, you are. You've got to come to grips with that before you can release it. If I had had this cold come on me, and I had simply said, oh, what cold? I don't know about any cold. I'm just fine. The cold would have gone there. But I addressed myself to the cold, and I said, get out, like that, and it said, okay. You have to recognize your faults before you can deal with them. To say, oh no, I'm not supposed to feel angry, therefore I didn't feel angry. Well, have you heard people gossip unkindly about others that way? They'll say, he's such a nasty person. Isn't it true they tend to laugh after saying something unkind? I've seen it happen so often, because they don't like to face the fact that they've been unpleasant themselves, and so they're really just pushing it aside with a little snicker. You have to face the fact that I wasn't very kind, was I? It's only when you can bring that up and look at it and see it clearly, then you can say, well, it isn't that you then should hate yourself. You can say, well, so what's new? I mean, everybody's got something, and I choose not to have this. Okay, get out. You see, you put energy into it, and you put another kind of energy into it, strong enough to dispel it. You've got to be able to face reality. Now, when people aren't sufficiently in themselves, when their center is outside themselves, when they don't face this simple fact that we are alone in this universe, when they're trying to run away from that fact, then you will find that all kinds of delusions enter into it. One woman complained to me that her husband never left her alone even when she went to the toilet. He felt rejected if she locked the door. Trying to create a bond of union that can't exist is one of the delusions. You have to recognize this fact first, that you are really alone. You have to have space for yourself. Marriage must be based on that respect for each other's space. Respect for each other's differences of opinion. Don't feel betrayed or abandoned merely because your nearest and dearest doesn't agree with you or wants to go off for a while by herself. We need that time to ourselves. It's the healthiest thing in a relationship to recognize the need for space, recognize the need for a certain amount of solitude, recognize that we will have certain interests that we don't share, and that we too ourselves will have those interests, not just our spouse, not just our friends. And it isn't wrong to have certain friends that are your friends, not his. Certain interests that are your interests, not his. certain times that are your time, not his. You need that. You need to recognize that marriage has to be from two alonenesses, and that is when you begin to meet on a level where there actually can be a communion. You see, you've got two islands here, and they look as if they're very, very separate from one another, but they both go down under the sea, and they're both projections of the same earth. And so here you have two egos, and each one seems very different from the other, and as long as you try to bring those two egos together, you can't do it. There's a gulf of all sorts of things between you. But if you get down into the deeper aspect of your nature, which you can do when you claim your superconsciousness, when you claim your divinity, when you get into meditation, that's why it's so important to spiritualize your marriage. Without spiritualizing it, you won't be able to reach that level of your being where real communication is possible. I met a psychologist years ago who said that coming into these teachings helped him to finally get what he'd been looking for. He said that until now my understanding of human nature has been like having a body without a head. It's the spiritual dimension that finally gave it a head for him. And without that, nothing seems to work. When you can get into that dimension in your relationship, then you find that you can begin to commune on a level where there is understanding. You don't need words. Words tend to I was reading a novel of Taylor Caldwell's recently. Somebody had recommended to me Captains and the Kings. Frankly, I don't see a single thing to recommend that book. It's well written from sentence to sentence. But for example, her insight into human nature, the more she tried to explain somebody, the less I understood him. And this is what I find with people, that the more they try to explain themselves, the more they muddy the waters very often, isn't it so? Often you find that the best way of explaining yourself is to try to just give the vibration. Share that inner feeling. And when they catch that, they understand. But until they catch that, your words just take them in circles, or they'll be understood in a different context, where one word means one thing to you and something quite different to the other person. So learning to communicate on a level of silence, I think on this basis, true relationships can begin to grow. Because of course true relationships are not just silence. Dale Carnegie said that the best way to make friends and influence people is to listen. And my dad says, what do you do when you have two Dale Carnegie students together? You can't just be sitting there giving each other space. There will be humor, there will be joy, there will be much activity together. But if this is the basis of it, then everything else comes right also. It's like a flywheel. If the flywheel isn't absolutely centered, the faster it goes, the greater the danger of the whole thing flying apart. But if it's perfectly centered, no matter how fast it turns, it will continue to spin on an even keel. So when you've gotten the center of your relationship established, and that center is your own self, and his own self, or her own self, when you deal with people from your center, instead of out there somewhere, as if the center were somewhere between you two, when you deal from that center within, you will find that you can relate in a true way. Now, I know that there are many people in this world who will get very uptight if you try to relate to them that way. Because they're angry, they want you to be angry too. Because they're trying to relate to you in a shouting way, they want you to shout back. And it just drives them up the wall if you take it calmly. But there is no cure for that situation except to be calm. There may not be a cure anyway, because the other person doesn't have enough refinement to understand this fact. But I know, for instance, somebody says, love thine enemies, it'll drive them crazy. They don't want your love. They want you to hate them back to give them a reason for hating you. And if they're the only ones hating, then it makes them look pretty bad, even in their own eyes. But you can't help that situation. You can't create harmony in someone else. You can only be responsible for your own actions. If they are not acting right, that isn't your problem. I know a woman came to me recently whose husband has been doing many dishonest things in his business and causing a great deal of suffering for other people, sort of creating a Ponzi scheme where he tries to get new investors so that he can pay off the old investors, and things like that just get more and more top-heavy until it collapses and just about everybody gets hurt. And she's seen this happening. She's tried to get him to see that it isn't going to work. You're just hoping that something, it's not that he's basically a bad man, it's just that he's a gambler. He's just hoping that somehow something will break right and at last he'll be able to make it good to everybody, and all he needs to do is just go a little bit more in debt and a little bit more in debt. And the whole thing is falling down around his ears like a house of cards. And she was saying, she was talking to me as if, what can I do? I feel as if there must be something. I said, it's just not your problem. There's nothing she can do about it. If there were something she could do, that would be different. But the most she can do is to remain centered, and maybe by that center he will begin to gradually get into his center, and then from that center maybe he will be able to do something right. Although it's probably too late by now. But the thing is that even your nearest and dearest, they still have their lessons to learn. This is in relationships with children too, isn't it? That you tend to feel that it's your responsibility to make them what they should be. And most people feel that way toward their wife or husband or close friends. There's a point beyond which you do not have that responsibility. Basically, even if you say, but compassion demands that I take it, you can't take it. They have to learn their lessons. You have to give people the freedom to be themselves. You have to respect them for being themselves. You have to respect that freedom. This is a very hard lesson to learn. People want to just practically shake those who are close to them into being what they want them to be. But you've got to accept that they come from their own space. They come from their own center. They came into this world with their own karmas that they have to work out. Even your nearest and dearest will sometimes disappoint you very much, and you have to give them the right to disappoint you. You have to give them the right to learn their lessons even the hard way. That's one of the hardest lessons to learn. But that's what maturity is really all about. To accept reality as it is instead of trying to dream it into something else. So this idea of giving people space and of trying to draw people out in that way, to relate to them on a spiritual level, this is the basis of a marriage. What does it mean, too? It means to have long rhythms instead of short rhythms. It means to not see the disagreement over this particular project, or whether we should go to France or Spain for the summer, which is something that will only be a matter of a week or something, to become so important that you get angry with each other and allow it to intrude on the love between you that is a long-range thing. I have, as an example in this case, my own parents, who, it's interesting because they're so very different in temperament. My father is so much just from Missouri. Just everything he's skeptical about. I mean, it was a typical thing for my father to say, what do two Dale Carnegie students do when they're together? Sitting listening to each other. My mother is a devotee and longs for spiritual truth and philosophy and so on. They're very different types, and yet it's been an amazingly harmonious marriage. I have never in my life known them to have an argument. And that's quite something. Here they are, 85, and still that way. Somebody once complimented my father on the harmony of the marriage, and he said, well, when I first married my wife, I told her that I would make all the important decisions in our marriage. And he was explaining why they were harmonious in this way, and he said, since then there just haven't been any important decisions to make. What he was really saying in his typical sort of ironic way was that nothing is more important than your relationship. Nothing is more important than your friends. At Ananda we have a rule that people are more important than things. And if we have a project that is very important but people aren't ready for it, we say, okay, goodbye project. We don't try to force people to get into it. If people don't understand, then wait till they do understand. If they aren't ready, wait till they are ready. And if they're never ready, then forget the project. People are more important than things. This is something you should remember in your close relationships too, that no thing is as important to you as the relationship that you have together. I don't say that that's the most important thing in your life. That's for you to decide. There are many people who have other priorities, and I think we should give them that right too, even though it's considered socially the correct thing to do to make your marriage your priority. But I would say that Mahatma Gandhi, even though it created a certain difficulty in his home for him to make India his priority, think what a gift he gave to the world for him to have done so. You have to choose what your priorities are. But at the same time, you have to give people the space, give them the space to be themselves and to grow in their own way, to recognize that the longer rhythms, that your relationship to each other is something long-lasting, and that ultimately this particular project, under most circumstances at least, isn't more important than that. As I say, sometimes it is. You have to back off, and that's why recognizing that you have this space within, getting back to that calm center and feeling it, I found that it's never wise to react emotionally. Never wise to react when you feel emotional. That's the time not to speak. Because even when you don't say the wrong words, the wrong vibration comes out. I said I love you, didn't I? Doesn't sound like love, does it? You get an edge in your voice. Wait till you're calm before you react. That's very, very important. Never say anything in anger. Well, that's when you can say it best. You may be losing a marvelous opportunity to be a real orator. Don't, however. Unless you're so centered in yourself that your anger is divine and not from your ego. Like Ramakrishna, one time, Rani Rasmuni, who was his patron, she was the owner of the builder of the temple there that he lived in. She was sitting in prayer in the temple, thinking about some lawsuit that she was involved in. And Ramakrishna, who knew her thoughts, reached over and said, "Those thoughts in this house of God," and he slapped her. And the other priests were really angry and all set to have him driven out, fired, beaten up. She said, "No, he said it rightly. He was right to correct me." But she wouldn't have felt that way if he had acted in real anger. It was sort of divine indignation coming through him. There was no sense of ego. With your children particularly, and somewhat with your spouses, there may be times when you have to express firmness, anger. For example, if a child is crossing the street into traffic, running out when their car is coming, are you going to say, "Johnny, come back, you might get run over"? Not very likely, not if you really love him. You're going to say, "Get back here, you fool," and give him a good wallop on the seat of the pants. Anything that you can do to really impress his mind that that's something that you shouldn't do. Maybe you can get by without walloping him, maybe you can get by without acting angrily, but you will do that which you need to do to get the point across, and he will know that you're not acting from anger. But if you really act from anger, for instance, he's playing the piano and you're reading the paper and you say, "Hey, cut that out, I'm sick of that noise," he'll know that you're acting from anger. He'll know that you're acting selfishly, and he won't forget it. He won't listen to you as much the next time. As I've mentioned in the book here, there's old Dad blowing off steam again. How many children have ceased to respect their parents because they talked from emotion rather than from justice? In your relations with others, you should be just. You should talk from that level. A woman in India told me that when she got married, her mother-in-law said, "I know my son much better than you do." In India particularly, that's true, because they arranged the marriage. He probably was only meeting the son the day they got married. But she said to him, "I know him a lot better than you do, and I know he's very willful. So whenever he talks to you in a way that you don't feel is fair, or if he's upset and scolding you for something, don't answer him at that time. Just take it quietly. Then when he's calm, talk about it. Or if you're upset, wait till you're calm, then talk about it. You'll see that you'll be able, he's reasonable then. Rather, he'll feel ashamed at that time that he did get angry, and you'll be able to talk him around to your view more easily. A bit of feminine wile, but it worked. When people are emotional, that isn't the time to get through to them with reason. Just wait for a while. Wait till they're calm, and then you will find that they are even more open they'll even appreciate that you gave them space to blow off steam for a while, and then they're more willing to give you your chance and your turn also. At Ananda, we try to emphasize this thing. Don't talk at times of emotion, but do talk. Now that's an important point. Otherwise, what do? You suppress it. It's very important to talk about these things at the right time. What is that right time? Okay, when you're both calm, that's certainly a part of it. If possible, there are times when you can't, you've got to talk. You have to be the judge. Whatever I'm saying has to be applied to the immediate situation. But when you understand the truth of it, then you can apply it in a realistic way. There are certainly times when you have to speak under the stress of some very difficult situation. Then try to keep as much of this truth as you can. Try to be centered. But don't say, well, I mustn't talk about it because we're upset or whatever. Try. One of the biggest problems in human relations is that the expectation that your wife or your husband is a mind reader. And he says, well, why are you upset? You know. Well, come on, tell me. You understand. You know perfectly well why I'm angry. You'll find that it's really important to talk about these things. I know Yogananda he knew our thoughts. He was a mind reader. And yet he would make us explain ourselves. Because in the explaining, we help to clarify where we're coming from. So even for your own sake, it's necessary to talk it out. But do it when you're calm, and do it when you feel the other person will benefit from what you're saying. There are times when we're ready for it. Often, for example, in a particular situation, the lesson can be learned more easily. For example, somebody may say to you, you don't think of your body enough. You don't think of your actions. You're always knocking things over. And you say, well, I don't remember knocking anything over. Well, the obvious time to tell him that is when he's just knocked something over, isn't it? In other words, wait till what you have to say can be really understood, because it's in a context that makes it clear. And then ask yourself, not only does he need to hear it, is he ready to hear it? Is he open? You will find that a sense of humor is probably quite apart from being spiritual and meditating and everything. I would probably make this rule number 2. Have a sense of humor. And what do I mean by a sense of humor? The ability to laugh at yourself, not at the other person. Anybody can laugh at the other person. You'll find that Hitlers and Goerings can laugh at other people. But to be able to laugh at yourself is the mark of greatness, of refinement. To be able to sit back and say, well, I didn't handle that very well. I was pretty much of a klutz that day, wasn't I? To be able to do it laughingly and really let go. This is important. Don't take yourself too seriously. Don't take your relationship too seriously. Remember that it's here today and gone tomorrow. And I'm not speaking of divorce, I'm speaking of death. I'm speaking of tomorrow as whether it's tomorrow or 50 years from now, it's still tomorrow, it's still a wink of time in eternity. And so, don't take it too seriously. Realize that it's a part of a greater whole. You see, when you don't take it too seriously, that's when you can take it seriously. That's when you can have a real responsibility to it, because if you are tense about it and hanging on to it, then you can't do anything about it. It reminds me of a raccoon that we found its hand was through the bars of a trap, grabbing food. And you know, it was so greedy that we were able to pick that trap up with the raccoon on the outside of the trap, but so determined to hang on to that food he wouldn't let go. And we were able to take that raccoon and out into the woods way away from where we were and let him go. But he was so greedy he wouldn't even let go when threatened with, for all he knew, was death. We had no intention of killing him, but how did he know? And so people, when they hang on to something with attachment and too much tension, when they take it too seriously, they're like that raccoon. They're hanging on so hard that they can't do anything about it. Don't take it too seriously, and you'll find that then you can handle it in a responsible manner. Be able to be more relaxed, be able to see it in proportion to a greater reality, and then it'll all flow. Having this ability to relax, to relate in a centered way, to relate in a real way, to be able to share with the God in one another, to see each other as symbols, as expressions of the infinite, as windows onto the infinite, not just onto a broader humanity. These are all a very important part of what it's about. It's an important thing for men and women particularly to understand the differences in each other on all levels. One of the greatest problems that come up in marriage is something that all the magazines try to tell you is a solution, is a fulfillment. Well, it can be a fulfillment, but it is a problem too. And that is sex. The expectations of men and women are in some ways so very different from each other. And until each partner recognizes those differences, they aren't going to be able to have a satisfactory relationship. And it'll corrode. It isn't something talked about very much, but I'm absolutely certain that it's at the basis of most divorces, that they couldn't get along in bed. It's very important to realize the differences, to realize what sex is really all about, to realize the gains and also the losses from it. Ultimately, of course, the purpose of sex is for children, but it's also a means of expressing love for each other. It's a means of sharing in an intimate way that isn't a necessary way to share. It's definitely a direction of growth to grow out of that kind of relationship to where you're relating purely on that mental level that I talked about. In fact, that's what platonic love is all about. Not just mental, but starting with the physical and then gradually growing from the physical to the point where the sharing is all on a spiritual level. One thing then about the expression of sex is to understand that it should be a process of spiritual communion first, not physical communion. Otherwise it becomes taking, not giving. It was a very interesting comment I read in an article on child abuse, where they discussed with the children where parental abuse of the children sexually was a problem. And a little boy came up with a really interesting comment. Or was it a boy? Yes. That when he was touched in the right way, it was a giving touch. And when he was touched in the wrong way, it was a taking touch. Isn't that interesting? That's really how sex is. If it's taking, it's something demeaning and unclean. If it's giving, it can be a means to growing to higher and higher levels of communion and love. That's the way it should be. In the books on yoga, as you all probably know, a great deal of emphasis is placed on self-control and chastity. Well, in this culture, what I have found is that it brings a great deal of suffering to people once they come onto the spiritual path, and particularly onto the path of yoga, because they think, I'm not supposed to enjoy this thing, and yet I do. I'm not supposed to do this thing, and yet I do. And so they feel guilty, and the husband starts looking on the wife as a temptress, and the wife starts wishing she'd never gotten married. And I have seen an extraordinary amount of suffering come between people in this way, and I think it's a subject that needs to be talked about, and openly and honestly. Basically, we have to recognize that people are where they are, and they don't grow. As I was talking about emotions generally, you don't get out of emotions by pretending they aren't there. You don't get out of them by ignoring them or suppressing them. Face them. Accept them. Don't think of them as something ugly or wrong, but try to make them beautiful. Sex is a very good example of that. that it can be a beautiful thing if it's treated in a loving way, and it can be an ugly thing if it's treated in just a passionate or taking way. And you don't get out of it by looking upon it as something ugly. You do get out of it by making it a holy thing that finally doesn't need the physical reassurance or reaffirmation of a love that exists anyway. And you reach the point where you are automatically self-controlled. You're automatically able to love on a plane that doesn't need this lower thing. You see, basically the reason people are looking for the physical manifestation, whether it be, and we must understand that sex is not just copulation, it's also just affection between two people. Male and female energy blending is an aspect of it, isn't it? And when you need to express it outwardly, there's really, the basis of that need is insecurity. Once there is absolute security, that need falls away automatically. You don't have to hang on to something because you've got it already. You see the difference? The communion is there on a mental level. It's subtle and it's hard to understand if you haven't yet experienced it, but it's an experience that comes naturally. Nobody's forcing anything on you. It will fall away of itself when you reach that level of closeness to one another. It's sort of like a kind of chocolate that I used to love when I was in Switzerland as a boy. And I went back as a man on my first return to Switzerland. I saw this same kind of chocolate, and just for old time's sake, I eagerly bought it. And, you know, I couldn't swallow the first bite. It was so sickly sweet, my taste had changed. Well, our tastes do change, and what looks like something we could never give up, we finally say, oh, what happened? I forgot all about it. And so, don't think that anybody is forcing a teaching on you. Don't become miserable about it unnecessarily. Just recognize, however, that even for fulfillment in a physical way, you won't have it if you're clutching and clinging and grabbing and trying to make this your reality. Remember that even in your most intimate moments, you are still alone. If you can relate from that aloneness to an aloneness, if, in fact, your experience on a sexual level is based on self-control, then you will find that it can be fulfilling. Otherwise, it will be something you need again and again because you never really got what you were looking for in the first place. It's a hunger that keeps returning until you find a fulfillment in yourself. And until you find that fulfillment, you'll never have fulfillment in anything. So then with this expression, remember it should be a giving, and you can give from your center much better than you can give out here. Be centered in yourself. Try to commune primarily on that level. Otherwise, it's physically draining. There's a lot of energy that goes out, which is replenished if there's a flow of love. But without the love, then what is it? The more joy you give to something, it's the joy that really gives you the upliftment that you experience from it, not the physical act itself. Now, the difference between men and women is that men are more easily aroused physically and have usually, not always, the physical need is greater in the man than in the woman. And many women have the feeling that the man only wants them for what they can get from them. And this is something that if men would allow their wives to teach them tenderness and sensitivity, it would be a very, very important thing. If, for example, the man would simply hold the wife without thinking about having a physical sexual experience, if they could just be together like that, then when the other happens, the wife won't be thinking, oh, he's just trying to take something. Because it will be in a broader context of tenderness and sharing and love. Remember, sex is not just a physical act. It's the male and female energy balancing itself out on all levels. The more you can put it on a spiritual level, the more really satisfying it can become. You'll find a great deal more happiness when that happens, just sitting holding hands, than you will from an overt sexual act. Anything that you enjoy too often becomes a drag. Ramakrishna also went through a period in his sadhana, in his spiritual discipline, where he found himself inordinately hungry all the time. And one yogi gave him the cure. He surrounded him. He had him sit in a room and surrounded him with food, just of all descriptions. And somehow it was just such a plethora, he lost interest. And he got over that. Children, young teenage boys who go to work in a candy store soon lose their taste for candy. And so anything that you indulge, any appetite that you indulge too frequently loses its edge. Try to make it infrequent. Try to commune together in other ways. And then you will find that when you commune together in this way, it becomes more and more meaningful. And that meaning becomes also transmuted into a point where you really do, quite literally, feel more joy, as I said, just sharing by holding hands or doing something together. There is an exchange of energy without a loss of energy, and that exchange is on a purer level, because it's higher in the spine. It's on a purer level, and therefore much, much more satisfying. Well, these are a few points in married relationships, but they can be applied in other ways to all kinds of relationships. To learn that all these relationships have ultimately one purpose: to help you to know who and what you are. In other words, all right, who should be your friends? Those who can help you to know God. Don't feel that you owe it to people because you happen to have grown up together or been drinking buddies for years, and now you're on the path, you owe it to them to hobnob with them, and that you're being disloyal to them if you don't. Actually, you will be able to help them a great deal more if you leave them and just get deep into your own meditation. Your karmic bond with them will be such that your higher awareness will help them, and perhaps in time, maybe years from now, will touch them on some subtle level, even if you haven't even heard from them for a long time, and lift them up. Seek those associates that will help you spiritually. Don't just seek them because of social conditioning or whatever. Your relationship should be chosen deliberately for what the purpose of relationship really is, which is to grow in understanding, grow in compassion, in sympathy, in a sense of unity with all life. All of these things are what should be the basis of friendship, that two people giving to each other that which each needs from the other in order to grow. Seek out people who can give you the lessons that you need to learn. Seek out people who already have developed those qualities that you need to develop in yourself. This is why the Guru is the greatest of all friends, because he has God, or he has those spiritual qualities that if you attune yourself to, you will be able to begin to develop in yourself and find God too. Your truest friends should be those who can give you the most of what you're really looking for, which is God. And you can be a friend to the others the more you have of God. So your greatest, in Tibet they have this idea that, or they had before they got invaded by the Chinese, that every family should have at least one son in a monastery. They feel that having one member of the family in a spiritual way of life is uplifting to the entire family. It's a spiritual law that my Guru told me, that any soul that attains final liberation, all its relatives for 7 generations in either direction are automatically saved. That's quite a promise, isn't it? I don't say that they're brought to the same level you are, but they're brought according to their own karma very, very long strides forward on the spiritual path and given the power to rise out of delusion. The greatest thing you can do for those who are close to you is to be close to God. So relationships then have this balancing purpose. They have this purpose of helping us to draw out or to share with others those things that we have to share, the discoveries that we have made, that in the process of sharing we help to reaffirm and to sort of nail down in ourselves, to make more dynamic to our consciousness, for both reasons, giving and receiving. Friendships are the most important thing going on in this world, really. I've reached that point in my life where projects don't mean anything anymore to me. People are everything. Friends are the only wealth that I have. And if I can share with my friends, and to me my friends are anybody who want the truths that I represent, even if I don't know their names individually, we are friends in God. But the greatest wealth that we can have in life is one another, is those people with whom we can commune with God through. Did I say that one right? I don't want to pull that one apart. You know, we writers have a problem with grammar. We're always trying to put everything exactly, and you know what I meant anyway, so what does it matter? In training your children also, it's a very important thing, and I have a whole chapter in this book on teaching children, training, raising children. Very important to give them the freedom too that you want for yourself. Respect their dignity, respect their stature as free souls, playing the role of being a child for a while. It was an amusing thing. One of the ladies at Ananda was trying to tell her little son, she was trying to toilet train him or something. Anyway, she was saying, "Be a big boy." And he said, "I don't want to be a big boy, I want to be a baby." I like being a baby. You know, there's a level of consciousness inside all of us that knows that we're just playing a role. That I'm being a man for now, or I'm being a woman for now, or I'm being a baby for now, or now I'm a young man, now I'm an old man. But we play these roles. And inside we're not touched by those roles. That little child is acting like a little child. And to some extent you have to respect his freedom to act like a little child. And to some extent you've got to reach that level of consciousness where he isn't a child. It's so amazing to see babies before they begin to pick up on the role they're supposed to play of helplessness, looking at them, and you see so often these little creatures that can't even speak, or at least they're not speaking English. You look at them and you see this old businessman, or there was one child I saw in Cairo recently, and he just looked like a Wall Street broker. I couldn't get over it. He sort of weighed everything very carefully, and we carry with us the consciousness that we had before. We carry with us the consciousness of the soul, and that's the loveliest thing to see in a child, a spiritual child. And you look into its eyes and you see that it's just not really identified with this body. You see the joy and the wisdom inside. I remember when Jyotish and Devi had their child, Kalidasa, and we were all complimenting him on what a beautiful baby was, and Jyotish said, "It's not a baby, he's wise." And it was partly the doting father, but partly true. You look into the eyes of such children, and spiritual people are going to have that kind of child. Children with spiritual karma are going to make it a point to be born into spiritual homes if there are such homes available. In the Bhagavad Gita it says such a birth is difficult to achieve because yogis often don't marry or don't have children, but when they do have children, the chances are much stronger that they will have spiritual children. Incidentally, that's one reason for coming together sexually in a spiritual way, because the way you come together determines the vibration you put out and the kind of soul that you draw into your home. So you see sometimes these children also just sort of, what am I doing in this little body? Kalidasa seems to resent being a little child. He knows he's not a little child, and this little body has got to get together. As he gets older, he seems to be coming more and more into his own. And there's some people that don't really come into their own until they become old, because it takes them that long to reach a level where all this other nonsense is out of the way and they can just function. I read, in fact, a survey that described the different kinds of skills and the age at which they tend to reach their peak. Poetry was around the late teens. Mathematics was also the late teens. But business skill was in the 50s. Philosophy was in the 60s. And other things, at different ages, these things tend to come manifest because you need that much knowledge before you can manifest on that particular level. So, remember that you are not who you seem to be. You are not a man or a woman. You are not young or old or rich or poor or an artist or a businessman. You are that soul behind it all, acting a role for a while. And when you are married or when you have friends, remember, this is not you. Don't be that identified with it, and you'll be able to act the part better. I had a lady translate for me in Rome a couple of years ago who got so much into giving the lecture herself. She was translating for me, but she was so identified with the role that she gave a wrong word, and I corrected her because I know no Italian, but we were talking about subtle things where, I think it happened that I never, the first 2 days in Italy, can speak Italian well enough to lecture, and then after that I can. But it was my first day there, and so she was translating for me, and she used a word that I knew wasn't right, so I tried to correct her, and she started in an argument. It was her lecture, and this is the way what I should have meant, even if I didn't say it. You will find that when people identify too much with the role they're playing, they can't play it well. Supposing you got an actor on the stage who's supposed to play Macbeth and he decides he prefers to play Othello. Or the director is there trying to tell him to act in a certain way and he just won't do it because he's Macbeth. He knows better than the director. Well, that doesn't work that way. You will find that when you can be separated from this role and understand that, well, I'm playing the role of marriage now, you will find if you play the part, you will play it much better. If you, in your heart, know that that's not what you are, if you always keep that center inside and then say, all right, but I'm married and this is the way marriage is supposed to work, and so therefore I will be, for example, considerate of this person in a way that I needn't be if we weren't married, you'll find that you'll be much more tender, much more solicitous for the other person's welfare, much more kind and tender and giving. You'll play your part much better for being somewhat withdrawn from it. Remember, everything you do is role-playing. Try to be a good actor, and try at the same time to remember that this isn't where your home is. You'll do your job better, and you'll do it fulfilling the highest purpose of that job, which is to get you out of this delusion, get you out of this role altogether, and help you to understand who you really are, a child of the infinite. Learn to behave. Learn not to just, well, what do I mean by that? In this context, what I mean is, learn to give outward expression to these lovely thoughts that are in your mind. Don't take your spouse for granted. Don't take your friends for granted. So often people will be polite to a stranger and rude to those who are close to them. And their excuse is, well, he understands me, he knows better. But there are certain proprieties that are there. I believe that it's more important to be polite to your spouse and to your friends than to the merest stranger. That doesn't mean polite in the sense of formal politeness, sort of opening the door and bowing as they pass through and so on. But at the same time, have that kind of respect for each other that you would give to somebody you were meeting for the first time. It's more important in an intimate relationship. Don't ever take another person for granted. Don't ever think that you really understand that person. I know it so often happens that, oh, I know you, and you start talking in that way that doesn't deal, among other things, with that person's potential. It's almost as if you were hypnotizing him or trying to force him into a mold that he may be trying to grow out of. Never presume where your intimate relationships are concerned. Always, as I said, give each other space, and that part of giving each other space is to give respect. Show appreciation. I had this interesting experience years ago with one of the monks at Mount Washington. I was in charge of the monks, and I was talking to the sister of this monk about her brother, and I said, oh, Bill, he's one of the best we've got. And she quoted this to Bill later, and he said, what? Say that again slowly. He couldn't believe that I would say something nice about him because I never had said it to his face. I learned a lot that time. Don't hesitate to show appreciation. Don't take it for granted that they know you appreciate it. This is something men often do. They say, well, she knows I love her. I don't have to keep telling her. Well, you should be willing to tell. It's important to express appreciation, thanks, gratitude, respect. To know to let the other person know that you really think well of them. These things are very, very important in marriage. Don't talk about faults. Don't try to be the guru of your wife or husband. It's not wise. Try rather to, in the humblest of all ways, make suggestions, or in the most tactful of all ways, say, well, this is what I've learned that's helped me. At the right time, include yourself in whatever suggestions you may be wanting to make, so that you don't make the other person lose face. Treat it as a very fragile thing, and it'll become strong. Treat it as if it were strong, and you may break it. Remember that relationships can be very, very fragile. Even close relationships, even people that you really love, one word can destroy it if it's just the wrong word at the wrong time. Always try to appreciate where the other person is coming from. Try to put yourself in his shoes. Try to feel that the way you've said it, this is what I mean again by learning to behave, the way you say a thing is quite as important as what you say. It's a difficult thing, isn't it? Because you don't want to chisel your words out with such diplomatic carefulness that you sound insincere. You have to speak sincerely, you have to speak from your heart, but if you speak with respect, I think that it will work out. I found in a relationship that talking things out at the right time and just really being open and frank and yet respectful, perhaps some of the most wonderful experiences we have had have been in that way. I found another very interesting thing, and that's something I hadn't known before. That is that differences can be a very wonderful opportunity to get to know each other better. Don't necessarily regret it if there are misunderstandings and hurt feelings. If you come to that hurt feeling and misunderstanding with the idea that I'm right and you're wrong, then it won't work. But if you come at it not with the idea of wanting to impose your will on the situation, but always be willing to be wrong. Always be willing to accept the possibility. In other words, okay, this is a truth that we try to really live at Ananda, and those who have the happiest marriages are those who live by it the most perfectly. Let truth be your guide, not opinion. Your opinions don't matter. Truth is what matters. If you hold a false opinion, you should drop it. If, for example, you see things in a certain way and you feel hurt about it, and the other person comes on from his side, try to see his point of view. Try to understand where he's coming from. Try to examine your own heart and see, well, is it possible that I'm wrong? Recognize the possibility because it obviously exists. I know James Hoffa said in the courtroom, I may have faults, but being wrong ain't one of them. Well, that just shows the extent of his egotism. You're probably going to be wrong at least 50 times a day. In my crossword puzzle that I work on sometimes in the paper, one of the cues is to be human. And the answer is 3 letters. And you know what it is? To err is human. But isn't it funny that would be the definition of our humanity? Take it for granted that you're going to make mistakes, and don't be attached to your mistakes. Be attached to the truth. So that when there's a difference of opinion, don't try to just put the other person down. Don't try to insist on your point of view. Be interested in the truth. And you'll find then that it's really wonderful what you see when there's a misunderstanding between you and you really are trying to come up with harmony rather than putting the other person down and just expressing your hurt. If you really are trying to create a bridge between you, then you will find that this misunderstanding forces you to levels of self-analysis and self-revelation that bring your friendship to a deeper level. That suddenly you may know more about your spouse or your friend may know more about you, and you may never have had to probe your own consciousness or explain yourself that fully if there had always been harmony, if there hadn't been that challenge to the harmony. So look on misunderstandings not as something to regret, but as an opportunity for deeper attunement, deeper understanding. These, though painful, can be wonderful. Pain itself can be wonderful if it's a teacher and not something that you keep trying to push out of your life. Look at it, examine it, see what have I got to learn from it, and how can I grow in order not to experience that kind of pain again. All these points, I've given you enough to work with this morning, and I think many good things will come out in your working together. Thank you all for coming.